All right. I don't know who else is joining us, so we're gonna do I'll do a short one for you tonight. Okay.
No.
So we did Shabbat last time,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to do kashrut, keeping kosher this time. So let me start just with a question for you. Do you know, or have you heard why Jews keep kosher? Like, what's the reasoning behind it?
I have never actually, I
Wait, I lost my earpiece. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear it.
I actually don't know. I've always heard of, I've heard things about, like the prohibitions on like pork and shellfish. I always assumed were at least in part derived from the fact that these were unsafe foods to eat. But I know we've talked in the past about how you feel like that's a modern rationalization for a Torah teaching. But I don't actually.
I think most people agree with you. I think most people would say that most Jews, I think, would say that it's for cleanliness, it's for safety, it's for health, it's for all these things. This is one of those commandments that at the end of the day, it's why, Dad, why do I have to? Because I said so, right? It's one of those commandments. It's God said you have to do this, and so traditionally you do it, right?
Got it.
But certainly, look, over the centuries, we've come up with dozens of justifications as to why this is important, and certainly cleanliness and health, I think, are two pieces of it. So I want to suggest that when we think about keeping kosher, it's really important to distinguish between what does the Torah actually tell us about, like what's in the Bible about keeping kosher and what isn't in the Bible about keeping kosher. What have we just kind of made up, right? So, so let me just share a couple of citations with you. So the first one is chapter 129. Let me pull it up here. Chapter 129. Okay. Behold, I've given you, this is in the Garden of Eden. God is speaking to, to Adam. I've given you every herb yielding seed, which is upon the face of the earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for food, and to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to every living thing that creeps upon the earth, in which there is a living soul, I have given every green herb for food. So now that's not so much about keeping kosher. It's much more about being vegetarian. One of the really interesting things is that if you read that in a very literal way, it really does mean we're all supposed to be vegetarians. We're all supposed to be eating fruits and vegetables. The idea of eating meat really didn't come about until 9 chapters later in the story of Noah. So in the story of Noah, it says, God says, Noah, be fruitful, multiply. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, every fowl, yada, yada, yada. They're all delivered into your hand. Every moving thing that lives shall be for food for you, as the green herb that I have given you all. Only flesh with the life thereof, that means only something that's living, which is the blood, which has blood, surely ye shall not eat. So this is actually the beginning, I think, of a real kashrut. So God says, after 9 chapters and a failed attempt at creation, God says, I kind of imagine the people, Noah and the people, just kvetching so much that we want meat, we can't stand having to eat like rabbits, give us something heartier to eat. And God finally says, oh, fine, you can have meat, but I'm going to limit you. I'm going to make limitations. And the first big limitation that God says is to distinguish between meat that is life or not living. It's not living, but it's connected to life, and meat that is connected to death. And what is the thing that indicates that there's life in it? It's blood. And so that's why kosher meat is not just killed in a certain way, but it's the meat is actually salted and it's soaked, and and the purpose of all that is to draw all the blood out. We're not allowed to eat blood, right? And so one of the, it seems crazy to us, I think, but one of the prohibitions in the Torah is that you can't take a limb off of an animal that's alive and just eat it, right? Of course that seems absurd, but the point of that is not even so much about being kind to the animal as much as it is about that limb still has life in it. And we need to protect that, and we need to sanctify that. So we move from being vegetarians to being meat eaters, but with limitations. And then it just gets more complicated from there. So in chapter 18 of the book of Genesis, verses 1 through 8. Oh, this is interesting. Okay, so this is the story of Abraham. And Abraham is hanging out by his tent, and three strangers come up. And he runs out to meet them. He bows to the earth. He says, hey, come on in. Let me get you something to eat. And what does he offer them to eat? He says to Sarah, make ready 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and make cakes. Okay, so like bread or matzah or something like that. Abraham ran to the herd and fetched a calf, tender and good, and gave it to his servant, and he dressed it. He took curd and milk and the calf that he had dressed and set it before them. So what's wrong with that from a kosher perspective?
Mixing meat and dairy.
Meat and milk, right? Abraham, like the father of Judaism, is serving these 3 guys who turn out to be angels from God, meat and milk. So clearly that whole idea of mixing meat and milk hasn't really, we haven't discovered that yet. That comes much later on. And then the last citation over in Genesis is from Genesis chapter 32, and it begins, I'm pulling it up. He took them, set them over a stream. Jacob was left alone. Jacob was left alone, and there he wrestled with a man. So this is Jacob. He's running away from his father-in-law, and he and his entire family are out there in the wilderness. He sends his entire family across the river. He's about to see his brother again, Esau, his brother again, and he has this wrestling match. And as part of the wrestling match, he gets hit. The person that he's wrestling with, the angel, whatever it was, really smacks Jacob right in the thigh bone. And to this day, we don't eat that part of the animal. Let me find the exact. And the sun rose upon him as he passed over Peniel, and he limped upon his thigh. Therefore, the children of Israel eat not the sinew of the thigh vein, which is upon the hollow of the thigh unto this day, because he, the angel, touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh. So there's a particular vein, apparently. I'm a vegetarian, so I'm the wrong guy to talk about meat. But apparently there's a particular vein that runs down the thigh that we're not allowed to eat. Apparently it's very difficult to get that vein out completely. And so most Jews nowadays just avoid the entire thigh, the thigh of the animal. So yet we have another step toward the crazy system of kashrut that we have today. The next one, we have 3 citations from Exodus. So this is from chapter 22. And this is the one I was mentioning before. It says, you shall not eat any flesh that is torn of beasts in the field. You shall cast it to the dogs. Again, it's reiterating to us, I think, that an essential part of kashrut is not eating, not taking advantage of maybe life. I don't know how to say this really, but recognizing the value of life. Maybe that's the way to say it.
Sort of the idea seems to be intentional about the taking of another life for your sustenance, right? I mean, that seems to be.
Yeah. You know, do you remember, what was that movie with the large blue, the hell was that called? Not Avalon.
Avatar?
Avatar. Thank you. So in Avatar was like the most Jewish movie ever. This was an amazing movie. In one of the scenes, there's they're killing an animal for food, I think. And I don't remember any of the names, but the guy who like kind of gets into the suit and becomes one of them is with the woman who is one of them, right? And he's about to just kill this animal and eat it. And she stops him. And she says, we have to give thanks to this animal for giving its life for our sustenance. And they do this thing where they put their hands on the animal, they feel it breathing, and then they kill the animal and they eat it. And that is so much about, to a certain extent, what kashrut is about, right? It's exactly what you just said. Recognize you're allowed to eat meat, but recognize what this means. This means that you are taking the life of another being for your own benefit, and that's okay. But recognize that, understand that what you're doing is a tremendously powerful act, and there have to be limitations on that, right? And one of them is not eating the blood. So in Exodus, we actually get to we come back full circle to Abraham and his feeding of the calf and the milk, And this is where we have that famous text of not seething a calf in its mother's milk. What's the verse 19? Do not see the kid in its mother's milk. So this is, what is this from? Chapter 23. This is right after we've gotten the Torah. So we've just been given these are sort of the sub-laws that we get at Mount Sinai. Now, if you look at this on a very simple level, it literally means just don't cook a kid in its mother's milk. And the joke about God and Moses is that when God was giving Moses this commandment, that God said, so Moses is sitting there writing it down, right? And God says, Moses, do not boil a kid in the milk of its mother. And Moses says, okay, hold on one second. Does that mean we can't mix meat and milk? God says, no, just don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. And he says, okay, all right, got it. But how long do we have to wait between eating meat and milk? God says, no, that's not what I'm talking about. Just don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. Moses says, okay. So do we have to have 2 sets of dishes or 3 sets of dishes? Right? And this goes on and on. Finally, God says, you know what? Do whatever the hell you want. And the point is that we took this one verse, do not see the kid in its mother's milk, right, and it became this enormous set of Jewish laws that many people follow today. Just an enormous set of Jewish laws. Let me jump to just a couple more. Leviticus chapter 11. This is probably one of the most important chapters in the Bible about keeping kosher because it actually gives you the animals that are and aren't kosher. So it says, these are the living things that you can eat amongst all the beasts. Whatsoever parts that has a cloven hoof, a parted hoof, and is wholly cloven foot, so not just a partial one, but a fully cloven hoof, and chews its cud, those that you can eat amongst all the beasts. So meat, mammals have to have 2 things to be kosher. They have to chew their cud, right? Which means that like cows have 4 stomachs. They chew the food, they swallow it, they regurgitate it, they chew it again, they swallow it, they regurgitate it, they chew it again, they swallow it. That's chewing your cud. So you have to have that, and you have to have cloven hoof. Yeah, those are the 2 key things for animals to be kosher. That doesn't mean the meat is kosher, but it means the animal is kosher. And then let's see what else it says. For fish, any fish that has fins and scales are kosher. So that's why what are they called? Shrimp, right? Or crab aren't kosher. They don't have fins and scales. What else? Among birds, vultures, osprey, kite, falcon, raven, ostrich, what else? Owls. None of these, bats, the hoopoe, I don't know what the hell that is, the stork, none of those are kosher. All winged swarming things that go upon all 4s are not kosher. So it goes on and on and on. It gives us this whole list, a real list of what's kosher and what isn't kosher. The gecko isn't kosher. That's a shame. He's cute. But the one piece that I wanted to focus on, which I'm having trouble finding right now, is about the pig. So why does the pig get such a bad rap? Right? When you think of the most non-kosher thing, you think of a pig.
Right.
So what is it about the pig? Let me see if this is it. No, not really. Okay. So the thing with the pig, here's what I've heard. Remember the 2 things you have to have in order to be a kosher animal? You have to chew your cud and have a cloven hoof. The rumor that I've heard is that every non-kosher animal has, let me back up. Every non-kosher animal at least has a non-cloven hoof. That is to say, as soon as you see that animal, you can tell it's not kosher because the hoof isn't cloven. It may or may not chew its cud, but you know right away. The one exception to that rule is the pig. And the rumor is that the pig has a cloven hoof, but it doesn't chew its cud. So it gives the impression that it's kosher when it really isn't. And that's why it gets such a bad rap, because it's giving the impression that it's something that it isn't. Now, hidden down here in this chapter, this long list of animals that are not kosher, may be a hint as to why we do all of this crazy stuff. And it says, "For I am the Lord your God, sanctify yourselves and be holy, for I am holy. You shall neither defile yourselves with any manner of swarming thing that moves upon the earth, for I am the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, yada, yada. Therefore you shall be holy, for I am holy." right? This is the law of the beast, of the fowl, of every living creature, and of every creature that swarms upon the earth. So right there, we have a hint as to why we have to follow all these laws. It has something to do with us being holy. God was holy. We should strive to be holy. And in some way, eating these, not eating food or eating foods makes us holy, sanctifies us, right? It separates us. Let me see. Is there one more text here? 3 through 21. Yeah, this is just in Deuteronomy. It's just another list of things that you're not allowed to eat. I'm looking to see if the pig thing is in here. I don't see it. In any case, all right. So that's what the Bible tells us. The Bible tells us that. So what did we learn? We learned, one, we used to be vegetarians. 2, we learned that you're not allowed to consume blood. 3, we learned you're not allowed to mix meat and milk, although Abraham did it. 4, we learned a whole list of animals that we're not allowed to eat. 5, we learned that part of the reason, at least, that we're not allowed to eat these things is because God's holy and God wants us to be holy. And so we have to separate ourselves from certain things. That's all the Torah gives us about keeping kosher. Let me just add one thing about being holy. So Rashi, an 11th century commentator, he defines holiness. He says that the way to be holy is to separate yourself from sins of a sexual nature. And he says that in the context of a bunch of laws about sexuality. But the idea, he says, is being holy is all about separating yourself. And Nachmanides, 200 years later, 100 years later, built upon that. And he said, forget sexuality. Being holy is just about separating yourself from sin. So a big piece of keeping kosher for Jews is just separating ourselves. It's intentionally being different, right? It's when you go out to dinner with people, it's intentionally not eating the things that they're eating because you're different. And what's so interesting is that, especially nowadays, that idea of us wanting to be different is so anathema to so many people. I mean, we want to fit in, right? For goodness sakes, this is what we've been striving for decades, for centuries, is just to fit in. And we sort of forgot about this idea that being different is actually a really essential part of what it means to be Jewish, and keeping kosher is one way that we do that. I was at a dinner the other night for the Jewish Federation here, the Commission on Jewish Education, a big fancy fundraising dinner, and the food wasn't kosher. The food wasn't kosher, and now the truth is, no one there cared. Everyone was fine. And if you wanted kosher food, they would have given you an airline dish, right? It would have been fine. But I was really bothered by it. I really struggled with it because, this is not just any other dinner. This is a Jewish dinner.
The Jewish Federation, right.
Jewish Federation. And whether or not we keep kosher in the privacy of our own lives and our own homes, I think there's something to be said for us doing it publicly, right? Which is why in our kitchen here at the temple, we have a kosher kitchen, because we feel that not only do we want anyone who wants to be able to eat here, but we want to be different. We want to set ourselves apart. There was a guy, we've talked about it before, Mordechai Kaplan, the conservative Orthodox rabbi, served at a conservative seminary, upon whose teachings the Reconstructionist movement is based. And he had a really interesting take on kashrut. So very often people will say, are you kosher? Right? Which really means, do you keep kosher? But are you kosher? So Kaplan says, you cannot be kosher. Your home can be kosher. And so what he says is, in order to live in both societies, a Jewish society and a secular society, what we should focus on is keeping kosher in our homes. So that is to say, in your home, you should be strictly kosher, right? No mixing of meat and milk, only kosher products, separate dishes, the whole 9 yards. But when you go out of your home, because you're not kosher, your home is kosher, you can eat whatever you want in order to be able to interact with the large community. And it's interesting because in many ways, that's what a lot of liberal Jews do. A lot of liberal Jews, to one degree or another, will have a kosher home, but when they go out, they'll eat whatever they want. Some families, we have this in my house. We have 3 sets of dishes. We have a set of dishes for meat, we have a set of dishes for dairy, and we have a set of dishes for Chinese takeout, right? Because our set of dishes are paper, but many people have a third set of dishes because they want to protect the sanctity of their home. And kashrut is one of the ways to do that. So what happened to the laws of the Bible and how we keep kosher today? Well, the rabbis took these big ideas of sanctifying life and not mixing meat and milk and staying away from all these foods, and they decided that we have to have a very strict code to ensure that we're able to follow these biblical precepts. And they, on top of that, they unpacked them to find even more precepts that they believe originally emanated from the Torah. So, for example, not just mixing meat and milk, but you actually have to wait in between eating meat and milk. Because meat takes longer to digest, you still have the taste of meat in your mouth. You can't eat milk after eating meat for, some people say 3 hours, some people say 6 hours. Traditionally, it's 6 hours. The other way, it's much shorter. After you eat milk, you can eat meat after like half an hour or so, because milk digests much more quickly. You have to have separate dishes, right? You can't put meat on milk dishes. You can't put milk on meat dishes. You certainly can't cook them together. And the reasoning behind that is that when you this is particularly an issue with meat, because meat is always heated. It's always cooked at one point or another. If you're eating corned beef, it may not be hot, but as soon as you introduce heat into the equation, it gets much more complicated. So if you have, like, for example, you have a pot, right? And you're cooking a stew. After you cook that stew, because the pot is porous, because everything is porous, a little bit of meat of the flavor actually seeps into the pot itself, and the pot itself becomes a meat pot. So that's why you have meat dishes and dairy dishes and meat pots and dairy pots and things like that, because and some pots you can kosher, like you can make them, you can go back and forth. Glass, you can do that. Glass is very easy to kosher. Something that's all metal, you can kosher that. You can, if it was meat, you can turn it to dairy. Some things you can't. Corningware, you can't. Anything that's really porous, you can't change from meat to milk. So we have all these different laws, and what this really introduced, that the rabbis really brought to the table, whereas the Bible talks about product, what animals can you eat? What part of the animal can you eat? What animals can you eat together, or what items can you eat together? That's about product. What the rabbis brought to the table was process. And this is the part of kashrut that a lot of people don't pay much attention to. And that how something is prepared is as important to its kashrut as what is being prepared. So I can take a kosher cut of meat, and it can be completely not kosher if I don't prepare it in the proper way. If I take a kosher piece of hamburger and I put a slab of cheese on it, or I cook it in a dairy pan, that's not kosher anymore, no matter how kosher the meat was. So a lot of people will eat out in restaurants, and they'll say, well, I keep kosher because I'm vegetarian. You could make that argument. I don't buy it, but you could make that argument, because my argument back is the same spoon that was just in the pasta salad may have been in the seafood salad 2 seconds ago. Technically, if you wash it in between, it's not such a problem. But by introducing the necessity of being aware of process, and then on top of that, by introducing this idea of a mashgiach, someone who actually oversees the process to ensure the kashrut, that kicked keeping kosher from a beautiful Jewish ritual to complete insanity. So, I'll give you an example right here at the temple. Elliot knows about this. We just had our big gala, and we bring in a caterer who does kosher and non-kosher events. Whenever he does kosher events, the only difference between what he does, is he hires a mashgiach. He hires someone to supervise, an Orthodox guy to supervise what he's doing. So I called her, and we have to pay for this mashgiach. And the mashgiach is like $1,500, plus you have to put him up in a hotel, plus you have to do this and that, the other thing. It comes out like $3,000. So I called the caterer and I said, listen, are you going to do anything differently? Are you going to buy any different food? Are you going to prepare it any differently if this mashgiach isn't there? And he said, no. I said, good. Cancel the mashgiach. I'm your mashgiach. I trust you to do what's right. When you bring the food here, I'll oversee it when you're preparing it here. Many people would not consider that kosher, right? But unfortunately, the industry of kosher food and of observing how things are has become so corrupt and so icky from people making just ridiculous amounts of money off of it. It's like It's like politics. I mean, it's really kind of crazy.
Wow.
And yeah, and unfortunately, like
It feels a little like predatory almost. It's like,
oh, it
you know,
absolutely is. It
trading
absolutely
on
is.
people's desire to be devout, and you
Right.
trade on that and basically exploit it for profit, which
Yeah.
doesn't feel. Yeah.
I have a really good rabbi friend up in Sharon and we were like 2 years ago, we were talking about, because he was really struggling. He's a Reform rabbi, but he's very traditional. He wants to keep kosher, but he also wanted his chicken to be free range, I guess. Is that what it's called? Or I don't know. You know what I mean, right? He wanted organic, free range, whatever.
Cage free, yeah,
Cage
all
free,
that.
right? And he could not find kosher cage free chicken. He just couldn't find it. And so he had to make a choice. And he chose to go with cage free because to him, what made something kosher was not as kosher, as it were, as something that was cage free. The word kasher, by the way, the word kosher means fit for use. So it's not just food. A Torah can be kosher or non-kosher. A mezuzah can be kosher or non-kosher. Lots of things can be kosher or non-kosher. And he said that chickens that are not cage free or free range or whatever it is, they are not fit for use. The environmental movement, the Jewish environmental movement, this was back in the 90s. They argued that styrofoam isn't kosher. Styrofoam isn't kosher because it's not fit for use. You know,
it's funny. That actually seems not incorrect.
Yeah.
It's sort of yeah, that makes sense.
So that we have all these laws and laws upon laws upon laws, and unfortunately, they really reside. They're owned by the Orthodox world. And so, you know, if you're looking for kosher food, the only kosher symbols that are going to count, that are going to mean anything, are the ones that are backed by Orthodox organizations. Because there aren't enough conservative or Reform Jews that care to eat kosher food. So, look, kashrut is a very complicated, complex idea that has been, in many ways, bastardized by the rabbinic world, not intentionally bastardized, or maybe to a certain extent intentionally bastardized. But I think that the piece that I would encourage you to take home is this idea of why we do it, right? Which, of course, there is no one reason, as we started this whole discussion with, but this idea of being holy, of being aware of what you put in your body, of being different, of being separate, of trying to be more like God, and using food and the things that we do every day. Food is the most mundane thing, right? Everybody does it. But to take that and to transform that from the mundane to the holy, from the ordinary to the holy, that to me really embodies what Judaism is all about. Judaism is all about taking the mundane, taking the ordinary and making it extraordinary, taking the mundane and making it holy. And when I go to the supermarket and I am looking at the items on the shelf and I have to choose, I have to look for symbols and I have to choose items that are kosher, that elevates the whole experience of shopping. It elevates the experience of eating. It elevates me as a person. And it's one of the greatest gifts. If we can get past the craziness that has been, kind of crusted on top of it, it's just the most wonderful gift that Judaism has given us, this deep awareness and appreciation for life. And I'm sorry, go ahead, Brandon. You were going to say something.
It sort of seems like it sort of dovetails with some of the other things we've talked about in past weeks, where it's really it's more about a process of living intentionally, whether it's whether it's Shabbat, whether it's kashrut, whatever it is, it's sort of at the root of it. It just continually seems to be, one, live intentionally, two, live thankfully, and be appreciative and that kind of thing. And it's like, it just sort of seems to keep coming back to this: take a moment, be appreciative, be thoughtful, and sort of really recognize that, all of these things are being done for you and have been done for you. And,
I would take that one step farther. And because I think every faith and every person, even secular people, can take moments to be thankful, can take moments to be more aware. I think what Judaism tries to demand of us is that become a way, that become a way of life. That awareness and thankfulness isn't something that we do every once in a while when we're feeling like it. And this goes back to the conversation we had about obligation, but it really is something that is integral to who we are. And because we're human and because we're so weak, we need things like keeping kosher to remind us every day, in every meal, at every moment. We need some things tools to remind us to live that sort of thankful, aware life, because it's not easy to do, and many people do it from time to time, but Judaism says do it all the time. And I'm going to give you the tools like Shabbat and keeping kosher and all this other stuff to help you do that. So
it's not a hobby, it's a lifestyle in sort of that sense.
I love the way you just said that. Judaism for so many people is a hobby. You're right.
Right.
And I think the goal is what you just said. Is for it to not be a hobby. And that isn't to say that when it's a hobby it's bad. I just think that the goal is bigger than that.
Sure.
That was beautifully said. I need to write that down. Judaism isn't a hobby. I like that. All right. Listen, I'm going to let you go because next time I'm actually going to hit two. I'm going to give you a 2-for-1. We're going to do the calendar and Passover because I want to make sure we get that in before Passover.
Get there before Passover? So, that'd be good.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
So we'll do both of those next time. But Brandon, it is always so nice to see you. And I love hearing about your adventures. And every time I'm watching the election results, I'm thinking, Brandon is probably glued to the TV. Like, I can't believe you took an hour out of tonight to not watch results. But
well, it's that whole point, right? I have, to me, it's really is. This is very important to me. Yeah. And, I really, it's one of those things you just have to take the time.
Yeah.
And
I guess
honestly, I feel it is easier a little bit being on the West Coast.
I was going to say, you're 3 hours behind. Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, it's only 4:45 here.
Right.
But also I have to say, it's like for me, after these classes, I feel so much better. And I feel so much, lighter and that's excellent. It's like I don't get the time to necessarily be as devout as I'd like to be, but getting to really spend this time and do the learning, and I really, really value it. So
good. I do too. I love it too. So go Hillary, and
all right.
I will talk to you in a couple of weeks.
All right. Thank you, Rabbi.
You take care, Brandon. Bye-bye.